Welcome to the 5th episode of Returning to Base, a Mechwarrior Living Legends podcast. Today, we've got 3 guests. We've got Andrew,
Hello, everybody.
and we've got Landros Radick,
Hello, hello.
and we've got Rick the Stick.
Howdy.
Andrew, what sort of things do you do?
Well, I'm the current leading sound dev of Mechwarrior Living Legends. I've been with the team since early 2017, and I'm responsible for how things sound right now.
Excellent. Landros, what do you do?
Right now, I'm mostly moderation and consulting for the team, but back at the start, I was video editor, sound director, sound designer for the team up until about 2009, 2008. And since then, I've just kind of kept tabs on the team and just been around.
Ah, so you're one of the old guard.
One of the originals.
And then our third guest, Rick the Stick. Well, what do you do?
Mostly I play MechWarrior Living Legends, and most recently I've developed Stick Stats, which gives you a little more insight right now into the assets that people buy and who takes what asset in the game.
I think we've got an entire episode planned on that for the future.
Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about there.
Alright, well, seeing as we've got both Landros and Andrew here, I suppose we could even open up the topic to sound. What's going on with sound nowadays?
Actually, that is mostly done now. There is still what I might want to do is very cosmetic, but the overall sound design of the things that were needed and that were still lacking when I started out, that's all there. So yeah, it's mostly finished actually.
So, Andrew, Landros, where were you getting, like, the source for the sounds you use? Are you taking pieces of celery and cracking them over a microphone like those crazy Foley artists, or what?
Not too far off. A lot of it was sound design libraries. There were a lot of Foley libraries that were used, mostly through one of my brothers who is a sound designer. I used some of his sound libraries in order to create some of the sounds. But yeah, I mean, a lot of what was created originally was just composites of things. The original direction of that I was going for was to be better than most everything that had been done previously. I was never really happy with the sound design of MechWarrior. Well, MechWarrior 3 was okay. MechWarrior 4, I was sorely disappointed in, and so a lot of it was to re-emphasize the realistic things that you would think of that these weapons would evoke. So the beam lasers were kind of a stabby pew pew that you think of for kind of sci-fi in my mind, but with some strength behind them, especially when you got to the medium and large lasers and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the original sound design was based off that. Now, there's been a lot of revision, and what you hear currently, which is absolutely fantastic, and I give a lot of credit to Andrew and
Was it
Lear
Corn before
for
that?
fixing.
Yes, exactly. Korn is mostly responsible for the new raw sounds when it comes to weapons.
Yeah, and so like all the new stuff that you hear, post, 20 geez, I don't know when you guys started that, 2014, 2015, is their work. So there's still bits of things you can hear me, which was initially just a temporary as the clan success or failure voice in the game. But there was a lot to the original sound design.
Yeah, we mostly, Korn mostly revamped the ballistic sounds, and the missiles and the lasers were already perfect as they were. We saw no reason to change anything about those. They were great, and they are still great. And as it comes to the PPCs, we only build on what was already there. The original PPC sound was a great source, and then Korn came up with an improvement. He mixed something in from the original Mechwarrior 5 trailer. I think I remember when it comes to the ER PPC, and I took it then even a step further when it comes to the heavy PPC. But the bass sound, that's also Landros' work.
Was Korn responsible for the recharge sounds and reload sounds?
Some of those, yes. Some of those he made, some of those I actually made.
Oh, cool. Those are very helpful in game to help me know when it's time to fire again.
Well, it's not the sounds only. I mean, we also had to actually put the code work in to make this work, which I heavily pushed for. That was something that our leader at the time, or no, he's still our leader now, but Invictus wasn't too interested in actually doing that. But I said, no, this is really, really necessary feedback for the player. This is something that he needs at his hand, or better at his ear. So yeah, I at the point I got Erkto, who isn't active at the team anymore. He was a coder at the time as well, one of the leading coders. He referred me to Enoch, who made all of the code work for the reload sounds happen, or the recharge. I mean, I would like to differentiate. There is reload sounds, which is when an empty tonnage gets replaced, and then there is chamber sounds when there's just a cooldown between the weapons. So all of this is what Enoch put in code-wise, yeah, and on the south side, that was Korn and me.
What was your most recent challenge in sound design for the game?
The challenge, unfortunately, remains always the same. The biggest problem of Mechwarrior Living Legends is that different to other games is that you have multiple weapon sounds, and also multiple weapon sounds that are grouped up. And that leads to these sounds, since they are synced, they will boost each other's volume, and they do it quite heavily. So the problem is to actually always level that out, especially since one aspect of what Fmod, our sound engine, is broken in the instance that when you have a looped sound, you cannot limit its instances. If you do so and you hit the instance limit, the sound will just go broken. That's really unfortunate, and I had therefore to create a sound variants basically for for the weapons into the game, so that for machine guns, for example, can be adjusted properly to the overall volume. And yeah, it's always a fight to do that. I think there's no really a satisfactory solution, because the problem becomes that when you fire one of those weapons, it will be very, very low in the overall volume, because, as I said, they all boost each other when they are in perfect sync. And yeah, this is always something I have to wrangle with. And since this is bugged in Fmod, I always have to compromise on that.
Yeah, it's even back when we were developing the sounds and things, and you know, like Andrew said, he was pushing really hard to get coders. That was one of the things that we're really limited on initially, was to actually have enough coders to dedicate time to developing what we needed for the sound, and so it was limited in the very beginning. But what he's talking about for the instances and everything with the sound engine, it's very, very hard because it's such a legacy product now that you run in. Everybody probably remembers, all the sound cutting out, after you fire stuff. So there's a lot of great work that Andrew and the coders have been doing to make sure that everything you see is what you hear in game. And unfortunately, we're limited by the archaicness of the engine at this point.
Yeah, that's true. When we took it over at that point, all looped sounds or looped weapon sounds for the rotary autocannons and everything that's looped and firing, they didn't have a tail sound. That's also something that was included thanks to Enoch's work.
A tail sound? Do you mean like as the weapon stops firing?
Yeah, exactly. That echo sound that you hear when it stops firing. At the time when I took over, that didn't exist. It just cut out.
Well, thanks for doing that. I do like my racks.
You're welcome.
All right, well, I suppose we can move on to another topic. We got a substantial list of community questions that were posed, and any of you feel welcome to give feedback, to answer them, or even if you've just got a little quip or a little detail, that works too. Yeah, some of these questions won't really be in your wheelhouse, but some of us might have some input on it.
Well, since I'm a leading developer, I pretty much have the picture of everything, so it should be fine.
So this is a question that each of you can answer in turn. I suppose we'll start out with Rick the Stick. What is the core appeal of this game to you? And this is posed by HiveMind522.
For me, it's my favorite Mechwarrior game that I can currently play, I suppose. I've been a longtime fan of the franchise, and I actually picked it up back in about 2016 when I was going through the process of installing Mechwarrior 4 for about the millionth time. And I came across somebody mention this game and installed it and tried it out, and I've been playing ever since. The mech combat is probably my favorite part, but I have also really enjoyed the combined arms aspect. I'm not a terribly huge fan of BA, but airplanes and tanks are a nice variety and kind of flesh out the universe for me in a way that previous Mechwarrior games never did.
Thanks.
So I've been like him. I've been a long time fan of Battletech and Mechwarrior. Initially, I'm the youngest out of five brothers, but my older brothers would played a few games of Battletech, and they had the box set, and I loved the art. Unbeknownst to me, it was the original unscenes that I also saw in Macross and stuff like that. So I became a big fan of Mecha, and my favorite aspect of why I play Mechwarrior Living Legends, or even why I wanted to help develop it, was literally the combined arms aspect. There was no game that really focused on driving other assets other than just the mechs. And while I love mechs, in the lore and everything that you saw on the tabletop, was the vehicles and things were just as deadly. So I wanted to see that come to fruition and see it realized. And I think, the team over the years, almost over the 2 decades, has really realized that vision. And you don't even see a combined arms aspect outside of, say, Mech Assault, which is more arcade, but something that really realized the Battletech universe.
Non-Battletech properties that came vaguely close. There's the Battlefield which actually, the
the brothers Kami and Krim, when they first started doing this, that was the original engine that they were modding. I think I remember some like old Timberwolf or Mad Cat that they had got hacked in, and then they're like, I think they were approached by the enemy territory team, the Quake Wars enemy territory team to mod that, and then as the history goes, is we were approached by Crytek shortly after.
Well, it's certainly been an interesting journey. So Andrew, what's the appeal for you?
I can only pretty much say the same thing. It's the combined arms aspect of the whole deal. For me, also, this is probably the best Mechwarrior experience since Mechwarrior 3. As far as I'm concerned, the whole franchise has been on a downward slope since Mechwarrior 3, which was, as far as I'm concerned, it's the peak. It's the peak of the official ones. There has never been better mech simulation, and unfortunately, we are constrained that we never can reach this peak ourselves when it comes to mech simulation, because we have to work with workarounds to even get the mechs working. But yeah, it's the best experience in that kind. And this game just has a real battlefield atmosphere to it, which also comes down to sound again. That is, as far as I'm concerned, it's unparalleled. When the server is actually full, and everything you hear, weapons, and see them going off everywhere. Yeah, there is an unparalleled battlefield atmosphere that I haven't experienced anywhere else.
I know with MechWarrior Online, they've tried to replicate some of that with weapons fire in the distance and those sorts of things, but it just doesn't feel the same as if it were originated from an actual player.
No, it's totally fake. It's in the background, and yeah. And the game itself isn't too great either.
I suppose I could answer that question too. What the appeal is.
It's
okay,
just to go back on that point, is it's hard too. Like, we one of the things I remember developing for Living Legends in the original, like back in early alpha or even pre-alpha, was getting distance sounds to originate for the weapons. So like you would have heard, you don't really hear it now, because we have to kind of cut the distance sounds out because of the limitations of the sound engine. But originally, I don't know if you remember, Kentax, was when we had PPCs, if it was heard in the distance, like you heard this kind of thundering going on, like a lightning crack, that kind of took a little bit to originate. But we had to remove those kinds of things, and that was one of the things I really wish we could bring back, because I still think, even as cool as we've got it now, and as much better as we've got it than say even MechWarrior Online, I think the whole atmosphere, I'd say almost 60% of the atmosphere is sounds in a MechWarrior game. And to really drive that point home is you have to have more immersion from things happening around you, and that's hard to balance, because that's one of the design goals, where you have to either play it like, well, if you're in a cockpit, are you actually going to hear these sounds, or is everything else going to be kind of muffled? And you see this kind of dichotomy of designing, and you have to like choose one path or the other of what feels more realistic or immersing. And you see games like Steel Battalion, where everything's muffled outside of the cockpit, so like you'll hear the kind of the rumbles and some of the shots of shells and things. But for MechWarrior, I think everybody just kind of would like to hear all of the crisp sounds rather than things being dulled. So it's a tough balance to try to evoke what you think the player would actually really hear. If that makes any sense. I don't even know if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense to me.
Well, in that regard, to distance attenuation, what we have now is you have a crisp sound when you are actually close to the asset, and you have a muffled sound, and also a very mid-heavy sound when you are really far away from it, which is pretty realistic actually.
All right, well, I'll take a shot at answering that question. And thanks, HiveMind522. It's a really good question. So in my case, I got my start. Oh gosh, I don't even know what the first Mechwarrior Battletech thing I got into, but I do know I was into the Clicks game when I was a kid, and although that wasn't terribly long-lived, and I didn't play a lot of matches of it, it did get me thinking, and I played Mech Assault a couple times when my friends with Xboxes would come over and bring their Xbox over, things like that. But after that, there was this long period where I wasn't reading any of the books, wasn't playing any of the games, but it was sort of just enough in the back of my mind that when I was on ModDB and I saw an ad for an upcoming mod, I was like, yes, I've got to have this. And that's actually what got me to buy Crysis, was the fact that Living Legends was going to come out for Crysis. I don't think I would have ever considered Crysis had I not seen that ad. And I had played Battlefield 2142, and it's one of my favorite Battlefield games. So when Living Legends came out, and it had a lot of that feeling, not as much as it does now, but even back then, it had enough of that feeling that I became quite absorbed with it. And there was about a year period, maybe in 2012, where I just didn't do anything. And but I came right back as soon as I was done with school, and I haven't really stopped playing since. Even when I went to Japan, and even when we had lack of a proper launcher for connecting to servers and things, I was the friendly community and the access to the mechs and the tanks that I wanted to play without the excessive complexity of a mech lab was just such a draw that I was willing to go to great lengths to continue playing the game. And well, that's how I got here. All right, let's see. Go ahead.
To be honest, I didn't even really talk about my start because that wasn't Mechwarrior 3. I actually started on the novels.
Oh.
One day I went into a comic shop and said, okay, I want to read something. And then the cover of Thunder Rift, a decision at Thunder Rift, attracted me. So that's how I found my start in the whole franchise.
I've often heard people say that Decision at Thunder Rift is one of the best novels.
It's really, really good, yes.
I'm glad we have a Thunder Rift map.
Yes. Interestingly, we are the only ones of the Mechwarrior games that have that.
Yeah, that's really surprising. You think they would have taken, they would have done anything to have a weird, interesting underground map or something like that. Alright, so we have some other questions. This one's pretty important. It came from Grim Avenger. It was pretty long, so I'll just paraphrase. He wanted to know how come Living Legends hasn't been ported to a new engine.
Oh man, that's. I think everybody here is like, okay. I think it's a fair question. Why hasn't MechWarrior Living Legends been ported to a new engine? Why hasn't MechWarrior Living Legends been ported to a newer version of CryEngine? That is there's a lot there. A lot of it had to do with the original founders and them working at Crytek. A lot of it had to do with the current community and the license itself. And it also has to do with what assets we can bring and how much developer time we can actually spend on it. Really, you're thinking about, yeah, you could port this, quote unquote, but really you'd just be developing a new game almost from scratch again. With the amount of changes that from CryEngine 2 to CryEngine, I think it's 5, no, it's even past 5 now. I'm not even sure what version number it is. The amount of changes are so significant that a lot of our current assets would have to be completely redone. So there's no porting other than maybe a few base assets. The sounds and things could probably be moved over, but we'd have to rebuild all of the sound libraries. I know that for sure. We'd have to redo all of the XMLs for how these sounds play. We would have to make sure that the code gets ported over and is played right, or just developed under the new the new developer tools and workflow and processes for that. So there's a ton of work that would need to go into it, and unfortunately we just don't have the developers or the time to do it anymore. We don't have the same cohesion that we had when the original team was developing it. Now that the community has kind of taken it upon themselves to continue, it's really such a large undertaking that we might as well just start a new game.
Yeah, as one who currently works on this and one of the leading developers, people don't make themselves a picture of how much is actually involved in this. Adding on to what Landros already said, we are also heavily depending on what we have in the Crysis Wars demo. There is a lot of the particle effect libraries, for example, that we are using and that we can't simply just move over because that wouldn't be allowed right now. And those are professional level effects that are not easily replaced. And then we also, at this time, we have entered an age where a client-server application or a server application in itself, that's not something that's being done anymore. So we would actually have to have somebody who writes us in a server. And yeah, this team is a lot smaller than the original team that started out, and the whole idea of this effort was to finish it, to get it, if possible, to get it to a 1.0 version at some point, and not to start all over again. That was never the idea that we had when we started out.
Yeah, that actually leads into another question that Grim had. He wanted to know, like, effectively, what would a 1.0 look like? When will development stop? That sort of thing.
Well, when will development stop? What is still down in the can is there is still an aerospace rework in the works for the VTOLs. They're supposed to move more like gunships than anti-gravity saucers, they're doing like right now. And so that the whole ballooning aspect gets actually removed from them, which is still, annoying a lot of people, let's just say, even though VTOLs, if you take them as a team, they're not that much of a threat. But they will also be more intuitive to fly if they return to a flight model that is akin to, I don't know if you have ever played that, but Comanche 4. This is basically what we're aiming for, that when you do not have an input, the VTOL will hover, it will auto-hover. And only when you actually input something, then it will either move forward or backward or to the sides or up and down. Not like it is right now where you have throttle and you never can really get it stable. There is no way to stabilize the VTOL. It will either, at all times, it will fall down or it will go up. There is no nothing in between that. And this has always been annoying on the side to land a VTOL because, you have to constantly hammer the up key. It's not very intuitive to land those things.
Yeah, I know. I was a VTOL player, experienced VTOL player. Even I will sometimes smash the VTOL into the ground hard enough to take damage.
And then there is, of course, the BA. which are still planned to be finished up. Finishing out the light BAs, the medium BAs that we have right now, the heavy BAs that are already in place, and the assault BAs that are still supposed to come, and to make them more of a part of the game than they are right now. Well, oh yeah, and the VTOLs, of course, they are the light VTOLs will also there will be more of those. No, not of the light VTOLs, but we will get heavy VTOLs. That is also something that's supposed to be added, which will have a lot of automated turrets instead of you aiming that much. That will be interesting to see how that plays out.
I think a good follow-up question that we're probably going to hear is, claw when?
Yeah, the claw. On that note, it has been discussed, of course, but we were more thinking about basically having a seating system so that you can hang off a mech more like it being a seat instead of really having an interactive claw, because that thing, the attempts have been very buggy on that, and well, that's something you from the old team did, and we were more looking into giving the mech seats that the BAs can attach to instead of having an interactive claw.
Yeah, I think back when the original developers were working on it, it was a very, very buggy, hacky way to do it, and unless we had gotten the actual SDK to code it in, it's just not going to happen. I think a lot of it had to do with the net code and just synchronizations, and part of it was also the gameplay portion, where if you were attached to a mech, you would be clawing onto it, and then you'd have to be able to, have a friend shoot you off, which was the original goal. But it just was beyond the scope at that point, and it just ended up getting under the rug of priority. So it was just not something that they can continue to work on. I think a lot of people probably remember, pre 7, where we had, BA charges, the C8 charges and the Inferno charges, which were pretty cool to do, and it was always gratifying to land one of those. They also caused a lot of crashes, so that was also a part of why those were removed.
And floating geometry. You could have an entire VTOL base float away if you place the C8 charge in it, and then you have no idea actually where your VTOL is being built. It's
I know in my case, I was in a beta test at one point, or maybe it was an alpha, must have been an alpha test. But oh my gosh, it was awful. So I threw a C8 on the back side of an APC, and 5 people crashed. And I don't mean they crashed to desktop. Their computer basically blue screened, and they had to restart their computer.
Yeah, that's bad. There is no other way of putting it. That's why we remove those things.
All right, so for a 1.0, you're saying battle armor and VTOLs. Oh, regarding battle armor, so if we're going to have medium battle armor and light battle armor and heavy and assault battle armor or whatever, the current medium battle armors, what's going to happen there? Are players still going to be in a medium battle armor inside of tanks and mechs and stuff, or will they be in a light battle armor, or what?
No, the idea is everybody will have to actually buy a BA at that point. There is a new base model in the works, which will start the pilot out, which will be the Nighthawk. It doesn't come to mind, but it's not a battle armor. It's below that.
PAL.
And that's yes, power armor light. Exactly. That's what that's the thing that slipped my mind. It's a power armor light, and it's that's below a BA. And from when the Nighthawk gets into the build, you will have to buy battle armors instead of having them in your cockpit.
Awesome. I think I once heard Invictus say something like he wanted to add one more game mode before 1.0. Has there been any decision made on what like another game mode might even look like?
To be quite honest, no. Yes, we want to include another game mode as well, at least one. What it's going to be like, there has been discussions on what we want, maybe something objective based or something like that. But yeah, it never really, so far it hasn't moved beyond the concept stage and concept and really asterisks to put it like that.
I think there's a lot of good ideas, but as we've seen, even in other games where a lot of good ideas for game modes, the execution can be flawed or it just is not actually fun due to meta. Um, one of my fantasies for a game mode is a nice assault and defend, or even one of the things I'd been thinking about is almost like a MOBA, where you would have a base and your resources would send out AI units almost. But I mean that's so ambitious and out of scope of what we're doing. But it almost goes into the territory of what would you do and what do you dream of for being a 1.0?
Yeah, what has been heavily discussed in that realm is something with less of a time commitment, because everybody plays terrain control right now. Some play sometimes Solaris Arena, but that's not much of a thing actually. So what mostly is being played are either organized events on the weekend, but mostly terrain control. And as I said, these terrain control has a very large time commitment. These rounds last a while. They can go past 1 hour depending on what the server is being set to. And the idea was to get a game mode where you can actually jump in and get maybe 10 or 20 minutes of gameplay and jump out again. That is something that has always been on our mind.
There was a map from Finalizer called Dust Bowl Arena that I played years ago, and it kind of had that quick pickup in game sort of, or pickup game sort of feeling to it. Uh, it would give you a certain amount of C bills to start out with, and you could buy any asset that cost that much. You'd go out, and then once all the enemies were dead, then the game would reset. There was a case of a destructible building, and if you put enough weapons fire into that, then the game would just reset. It wasn't fully implemented, but it was implemented enough that it was fun.
Yeah,
Interesting to see that come back.
like that.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the more plausible implementations of another game mode.
I think something that we're kind of missing in even in some of the community maps is really kind of like a ruined battlefield. You know, something where it gets hard because you have to really balance the frames per second performances. But I always think about things like, you know, the urban environment of MechWarrior 3, make it a little more sparse, but really have a lot of that kind of blown up, torn down environment to fight in. And you know, what kind of tactics or strategies you can come up with and things like that. I'm really big into atmosphere.
All right.
Yeah, well, I can concur with that. I'm as well.
We've got a few more questions here. I'll put this one to Rick. Perseus says, "What mech has the best cockpit and which has the worst?" So, in your opinion, it's like
I'll
your favorite.
start with worst because that's easier for me to answer because I have some that I really don't appreciate. The Nova Cat cockpit is just so bad to me. I could be the only one who doesn't like it, but it is a long horizontal strip across the center of your screen, and that's all you get to see. It can make it very difficult for me, at least, to use them. Best cockpit though, I do like the Mad Cat cockpit in Living Legends a lot. It's up there. It's up there maybe with the Cauldron Born as well.
Yeah, I'll agree with the Nova Cat as being one of the worst. I'd love to see a redesign if we could get who was it? Was it Chezer who did the Commando?
Yeah.
I'd love to see if we could get Chezer to redo the Nova Cat, and make that one, really pop the way he's redone the Commando. Um, I would say I agree with the Mad Cat. I love the Mad Cat's cockpit. It's beautiful. It reminds me of the MechWarrior 2 intro, when you're inside, when you're seeing that in the cinematic, and it the way the weapons work and the way that mech works by and large feels very much like the cinematic to me. Um, but I'd also say Chezer's work on the Commando is great. I just wish our animations for it were a little bit better.
Okay, as for me, yeah, Nova Cat certainly. That belongs. It's just a strip. I fear we might not have the source for so that we can alter it in any way. I'm afraid that's something that's missing, but I'm not certain. But I fear that's why there has never been talking even about changing that, because the source for the art isn't there anymore, and we would have to redo the Nova Cat entirely to do something about it. Yeah, as for the best, for me, I say that Timberwolf and Marauder are pretty much tied. They are both have a lot of view area, and they both look gorgeous.
I've been a big fan of the Owens cockpit. I love the screens. The screens just they're the right colors, and I remember seeing it in some trailers as it comes out of the water, and the UI is off, and you can see just the cockpit. Oh, it's brilliant.
I think the Owens is the poster boy cockpit as well. It's pretty much the most complete cockpit that exists, if I remember that correctly.
I think another one of my favorites is the Hollander. Just having that big gun right there next to your cockpit is just so fun.
I disagree. It takes a lot of view area for that pleasure. I'd rather see more on the other side than have that gun sticking out there, but that's just me.
That's fair. That's fair.
And then worst, I actually prefer the Nova Cat over this one other asset, but it's not a mech. It's actually an aircraft, and it's the Avar. There's some really clear like seams in the textures, and sure, I can see a nice little screen in the cockpit, but that's about it. The other aerospace, I think, have better cockpits than the Avar. Perseus also wants to know, what do you do when you get 2v1'd? What that are either the same size as you or smaller than you? What do you do to try to win in that sort of situation? I suppose, yeah, anybody can take this question.
For me, because I'm not really keeping up with what the metas are, with how everybody plays. But tactically, for me, it would be kind of fall back a little bit. If I'm in something like a Warhammer and I've got some lights going on around me, I'm probably going to get more damaged and useless before I take both of them out. But I'll try to focus on one, typically. Just focus on one, make sure I'm focusing fire on any one aspect of that mech that's most damaged, and try to take it out, and then do a safe retreat if I can, to continue the engagement with the other one at the same time. So that's probably what I would tend to do. At least tactically, that's how I would think of it. doesn't always play out that way when you've got, VTOLs and aerospace coming down on you too.
I know for me, when I get attacked by two assets that are about the same size or smaller than mine, I have to take a quick assessment. Is there a place I can retreat to, or am I gonna die? If the answer is I'm gonna die, then yes, focus on one of my enemies. And one of the things that, if you're in a mech, for example, that some people don't always know to do is that if the enemy mechs are circling around you and you're having a hard time keeping your weapons on target, you can actually reverse throttle. So hit X usually to kill your throttle, then hold down on S to reverse throttle, and rotate your torso the opposite direction, and you'll usually catch the enemy before they have a chance to turn around and start running the other way.
What? Not W always?
Yeah, I think I agree with Landros on that. It depends on the situation, of course, as well. Do I have a tonnage advantage, or am I below what my opponents have? Yeah, but focusing on one is certainly the way to go, because when you're dividing attention, you're probably not going to do much to either of them.
All right, we've got another question from Critical Rocket, and he has two questions. Are they still open to adding more mechs, tanks, aerotech further down the line? Well, we just heard some of that. Yes. At least for the aerospace. I didn't hear anything about more mechs or tanks.
Specifically to the VTOLs to round that out, but the mech lineup is done. There might be some bonus mediums that might still come. We will have to see, but mostly we're done with mechs, and the two new tanks that are running around, the new updates that's being tested right now, openly tested as well. Yeah, they round out the tank lineup. So mostly we are closed on that, but we'll have to see.
Critical Rocket also asks, what are the priorities for the team going forward?
Yeah, I'd say that has been covered. Well, we are going to go into VTOL and BA development from now on.
All right. Kamikaze asks, when will we have tripod mechs?
Which kamikaze asked that question?
It's the one you're thinking of.
Oh no.
Our dear founder is joking around. Yeah, but honestly, as for more legged assets, that's just not an option. Because of the way that the mechs are actually implemented, which is it's a gun turret sitting on on oversized man legs, really man legs. That's how they work, and because of this workaround, they're also kind of stuck in the orientation they are. You see that they never really adjust to terrain. They are always straight up. If we added quad mechs or something, it would look really, really terrible if they would be standing on any incline, because the legs would all be on the same plane and would be hanging in the air, and some would be connected with the terrain. It would be awful.
Yeah, I remember vaguely way back was that we had to turn the IK off for terrain adherence. I think some of the animations and some of the restrictions on the rigging was causing problems with animating the mechs. So I think the decision early on was we'll just turn the IK off.
Was that the thing where, like, if you turned really sharply with an Owens, that it would lean into the turn?
Yeah. I'm surprised you remember that.
It's hard to forget. Somebody had this video of an Owens dancing around and sliding left and right on Extremity.
Yeah, there was. I mean, it's really cool tech, and you do see it in MechWarrior Online. That was something that they could get working, and you see it now even in the Unreal Engine with MechWarrior 5. But unfortunately, it's just out of our grasp as far as being able to spend time on get it working.
Let's see. So what else is on here? I see quad mechs, hexapod mechs.
Yeah,
Lots of
that's all
questions like that.
covered under what I just said.
Yep.
It's not an option, guys. I'm sorry.
Zhid OS and Sabrist ask for the urban mech and the Tenchi, respectively.
Yeah, we're jumping that question. That's basically just trolling at this point.
That's what I figured. So let me take a second. I'll read this.
I can't remember. I mean, I'm getting crossed on what the Tenchi is. Was that actually a canon battle mech, or was that
No. It's the
that was
one
a
that
House
MacTech
Jirai?
it's the one that MacTech introduced and was specifically um they specifically made that for a now dead team member. I don't see
Right,
any reason why we would ever want to do that.
right, yeah. Because I think
Especially also with the way MacTech treated the original Living Legends team, because as I remember that the original team actually asked MacTech for help to get the ball rolling, and they were like, nah, folks, we are not going to do anything. You're probably not the real deal.
yeah, and that was fair. But I think that historically, you're right. It was a dead, a now past member of I think it was House Jirai, which was a big thing big clan back in MechWarrior 4. And the member, his name was Tenchi Muyo, which was named after, obviously the anime, but it was dedicated to him when MechTech developed it. So probably not, more than likely not.
Yeah, and honestly, it doesn't really add anything. There is no niche that it would cover. There is no reason to include this.
Let's see. Firehound asks if there are any plans in the future of having a mapping standard developer kit or repository.
There used to be. We used to have back on 1.0, or well, not 1.0, but 0.10. Its release was, there was a kind of prefab set for all of the assets, that any sort of, if anybody wanted to make a game mode, was you would just need to build it off a set. I don't know whatever happened to that though.
Yeah, I don't think we have that anymore. And yeah, right now, mapping has come a bit too close because our mappers are mostly inactive. So I'd say right now, doesn't look too good for something like this.
We do have another map that may or may not be included. I didn't see the latest on that one. Can you speak to that one, Andrew?
You mean, or yeah, I think what was it called again? One moment. It's in the mapping
Well, while
chat.
you're looking that up, I have heard at least our most active people when it comes to mapping, instead of making new maps, have been trying to improve old maps, like how we now have TC Extremity,
Yeah, exactly.
and we have a changed up TC Desolation.
Yeah, there has been some efforts outside of the team to improve some of the maps just via XML editing, and the results have actually been pretty good. It's surprising how much you can simply do with the XML itself. I didn't actually expect that to be possible, that you can do so much outside of Sandbox. But yeah, the map we just talked about is TC Lost Hope, which has been made by Volkodav, who has been recently added to the team, which would be a new urban-centric map. It looks really good, but supposedly it's really performance intensive. There is really graphic intensive stuff, and the last time it was tested, it didn't run too well. But yeah, we have to see.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have another urban map.
Yeah, an official one even. I mean, Urban Jungle is nice and all, but the problem with Urban Jungle is that it's another. I mean, even that one has been edited now through a community effort, doing XML changes as well. But yeah, the sources for Urban Jungle are lost. That's something when the original maker came on, confirmed that to us, that in some HDD crash he lost the sources. So any major reworks on that map are sadly out of the question.
All right, we've got another question from SJ Samad Al Hayati, and
that's actually Spatsnitz beer.
Spetsnaz Bear? Okay. Spet says, what are some game mechanics or elements that you wanted to implement, but for whatever reason you couldn't?
Landros, you want to take that one first?
Oh man, mine's gonna be really long-winded. So when we were originally developing, we had several game modes. First was Solaris Arena, because we needed something that was quick. And then terrain control, which was Trial of Annihilation initially. And we had another assault and defend game mode that was in the works. We couldn't quite get it working. And then there was a game mode where it was purely assault and defense, where you only defended on one side and you only assaulted on one side. And that involved trying to eventually destroy an Overlord or Onion dropship, which or a base at one end. But work on those was always ever just preliminary. I think you probably saw in a lot of the trailers early on where you had the Onion or the Overlord dropships. We actually had working bays in a couple of those, but that was when we had the rising elevator bays rather than the spawn as it is now bays. But I'd love to see something
one of the
like that
versions of
come out.
Zodermere used to have those elevator bays.
Yeah. Did people actually get them working again?
Yeah, I think so, but they were still buggy enough and inconsistent enough that they just got removed.
Yeah, it was something that was kind of cool. I thought it was a neat concept because it was like pulling it out of a little like drive bay or something like that. But I'd love to see. So I touched on this earlier about a MOBA. I'd love to see a game mode where we get like some little AI assets to assault bases, and as mechs, like you could fight along with those assets to help take them over. And as you gain more assets, you gain more resources to build heavier assets to help fight further. So you always have this kind of constant power struggle where, oh, that was the other game. It was called Power Struggle. Or no, that was the original Crysis mode. That's right. My bad. I'm sorry. I'm getting old. But I'd love to see something like that where you have like this supply line of things where you're consistently having to not just defend the base, but defend the line itself. So like a MOBA where one of my big things where I started thinking of this was actually Paragon. I don't know if anybody remembers that game from Epic. It was a third-person MOBA where in your lanes you had creeps like you would have in Dota or League of Legends, and these would actually be like infantry or supplies or things to go to the base. And if those got disrupted, the base would be more vulnerable to takeover. So you always had this kind of dual role to play. And then one of the big things early on when we were developing, before we had mechs, was we were doing a lot of gameplay tests with just like the Demolisher and the early iterations of the battle armor. I'd love to see something where it's really battle armor. I know that this is probably going to be a hot take for people, because I think there's talk of let's not go in this direction, but I'd love to see a more battle armor combined arms focus, where battle armor have to go into a base and take it over, very similar to I don't know if anybody remembers this game called Angels Fall First, where you have these ships and things, but when you actually go to take over or destroy a ship, you have to actually board it. It's very much in concept to what would be planet side. I'd love to see a planet side with basically in the Mechwarrior universe. That
That'd be
would be my
awesome.
ultimate game
mode. Spetsnaz Bear also asks,
Well, I have something to add to this.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I discovered in a lot of fragments of work also that the old team wanted to do a lot more in the aspects of mech simulation, like having real now the words are slipping again.
Peripheral support.
That's now that's terrible. God damn it! What is this thing called that balances everything?
Elo?
The mech lab?
Gyroscopes?
Yeah, there was supposed to be gyroscope simulation, for example, definitely. But yeah, the way the whole things works right now, it doesn't seem to be possible to do that really.
Yeah, the mechs would have to be able to tilt and lean and everything like that.
Exactly, right. And having real recall on weapons as well, as they did it on Mechwarrior 3. There was also hints on in the files that was planned, but yeah, same problem.
I'd like to really see one of the things I thought that we could have done way back when, because we had access to Scaleform, was to actually start like an online, almost like an online service, kind of like how MechWarrior Online worked, but more to harken back to, like, if anybody remembers, I don't know if any of you guys ever played it, but Battletech 3025, or Battle, it was like the early MMOs of Battletech or MechWarrior. But there's that whole, it had a whole hierarchy. On the Genie service back in the early 90s or mid 90s, it was using the MechWarrior 1 engine, and you had the entire aspect of the Inner Sphere, where each of the House Lords was run by a player, and they each had their own command structure and hierarchy, and you were promoted or you joined one of those houses, you were assigned to a unit, and as you were assigned to that unit, it was a lance, and you would be assigned mechs from the quartermasters on each of those houses. So it had this entire command structure that you really only saw in a 4X these days, that was playable. They had supply lines. You had to take planets progressively. You couldn't just jump a planet and then hop here and there to win it over on a faction. And that's something I wish we could have done to be more practical in this day and age. I would have loved to have seen something like a Solaris Arena tournament that had live that had basically seasons, where you would have a champion for a season, and I don't know if it would just run off mostly just kills or brackets, but I'd love to see a game mode like that, where if we were to do anything in the future on a new game or new development of anywhere, I would probably implement something like that to get people always playing, to have quick matches where you would have actual stats and things to brag about.
Yeah, we had the Planetary League back in 2013 or so, I think. And yeah, that sounds a lot like what our Planetary League, only with a lot more practical automation included to help smooth things out and make it so there wasn't so much paperwork to be done.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the old leagues like NBT and TKZ, and we're going back, far back. A lot of that stuff was really cool and really well done. Dark Phoenix did a lot of great stuff with NBT to make it really inclusive, to have a command and control system, and run supplies and tracking. And I think, if anything, I'd love to see a system where I'm honestly surprised that like MechWarrior 5 or MechWarrior 4 Online doesn't do more of it, um, where there's player control over the supplies and not supplies, but like the mechs being assigned and things like that, and damage states, because they did have all that kind of running back in early betas. um I almost want to say alpha of MechWarrior Online, but it's that's the kind of stuff that I love. I love getting in the nitty gritty of that stuff, and I feel like that really helps sell the experience, because you have people who join clans and these guilds and have this hierarchy, and that really, to me, was what I grew up with, back in NetMech, or MechWarrior 2. But I don't know. Maybe I'm a one-off. I don't know. What do you, like, Kentax? You haven't really talked about it much yourself. What is your ultimate goal for a MechWarrior game?
Gosh. Well, what you were talking about there, that's definitely something I've wanted for a long time. I do remember quite fondly, for example, being able to move mechs around from planet to planet. We would build most of our mechs on worlds that had mech factories, and the mechs would always show up in groups of one variant, or well, one of every variant. And so you would end up getting some of these garbage variants that aren't very useful or have very, very narrow uses. And so you take the ones that are narrowly useful and focus them on planets that have maps that play to their advantages. One of the best examples of this was the map Ilium Range, really cold. There was a whole planet where almost everything was cold maps. And so this was back when there were medium pulse laser Osirises, and there didn't have to be the same number of players on each team. You just had to have no more than 360 tons for Inner Sphere and no more than 320 tons for Clan, and no more than 345 if it was Mixed Tech. But so what I did was I just shoved all of the 4 medium pulse laser Osirises that used to exist onto that planet. And so there was one match where I think it was under Mouse, Smoke Jaguar brought these Mad Cats and Black Lanterns and all these other things, and we just swarmed them and murdered them with a whole bunch of Osirises. It was hilarious. Other sorts of things that I'd like to see in a MechWarrior game. Gosh, not MechLab, no. That's never really been what I've been. I'm sure I enjoyed MechLab to a degree, like when I had that commando with literally no weapons on MechWarrior Online. I just had a tag and a narc and Guardian Electronic Countermeasures and Beagle Active Probe and just nothing else. So that aspect certainly can be fun, but I feel like it should be only one game mode and certainly not the one that gets the most focus. Gameplay mode wise, I definitely want like missions where you can go and like maybe the enemy is necessarily going to lose. There's almost no way you're not going to win, but they can change the degree to which you'll win by.
That's a really interesting point. I love the aspect of like really assigning those variants, which are specific uses, because in the lore, that's mostly correct. You know, that's what they were, you know, built for, was for specific use cases. So, you know, you had fire support adders, you know, like the Adder C, and like, you know, some of the Stormcrows where it's just all missile fire and stuff like that, and they were relegated to the back of the battle. So I'd love to see stuff like that implemented. I love that point.
Rick, do you have anything to add on that point? Are you interested in something like a planetary league with clans and all of that?
So I've never actually, unlike I guess the rest of you guys, haven't had the opportunity to play in such events, except for some of the player run events. Like I played a few Chaos March rounds back in the day, and I play some of the single life games that Direwolf organizes these days. Um, from a gameplay perspective, I think all that's the logistics can be fun for some people. It's not necessarily my favorite thing. I could feel myself getting into it, but I guess contrary to Kentax, I would rather sacrifice a more logistics focused meta game for the inclusion of, say, getting into the nitty gritty in a mech lab. That was always one of my favorite parts of the Mechwarrior franchise. Was getting into and building just ridiculous variants that really shouldn't work or be useful at all, just to see what you could do with them. Although I will admit, in other games, the concept of more planetary based large scale strategy has been interesting. I don't know if you guys ever played a real time strategy game from the 90s called Total Annihilation, but it had a similar mode where the two factions in the game would fight for different planets in the galaxy in a similar manner, and it was all online and worked through an external service that's long since dead. But
man,
it was
I forgot about that.
It offers very interesting. I forget what it was called. Landros, did you ever play in it?
No, I didn't play it. My brothers did though, and I remember watching them play in the league.
Yeah,
Or not the league, but the online portion. But yeah, it was a planetary control kind of system.
yeah. I did some reading on some of that after discovering it, and in some games, I think that would be a really cool like aspect to add on top of it. But in at least MechWarrior games, there's so much going on in respect to it's a simulation game, it's a first-person shooter, at least in MechWarrior Living Legends case, it's also a combined arms game, that it doesn't necessarily need the extra strategic front for you to be thinking about, to my mind anyway. Some players may want that, but the MechWarrior games for me are so fun because there's just so much going on that I'm not sure that they would necessarily need that feature to be complete, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think with MechWarrior, it's really got an interesting aspect to it that you really have this player kind of player skill of or it's really heavily player based. But if you were to take the combined arms aspect of it is, you know, you could throw a mass of assets at a point and be like, yeah, that's ours. But you still have the player skill really play a part of whether or not that, the tactical, the strategery of taking those points. And I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of Mechwarrior. Whereas while you play planet side, it's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors. But it's more like just throw a lot of bodies at it and hopefully they'll finally concede, or you just happen to luck out on timing.
I really think our Chaos March format was advantageous in this regard, because the problem I always see with planetary leagues is people and their availability. Battles need to happen, and teams need to meet up, and the players need to be there because they are assigned to specific clans, and only when everybody is there, the battle can happen, and it needs to be that, because not everybody is there, or too few people are there. In Chaos March, that was never a problem, because everybody was just assigned to whichever faction was battling on that day. It made things a lot easier and more fluid in that regard.
Yeah, with the Planetary League, the one back in around 2012, 2013, was that we had players that were dedicated and would only play for one faction, and then we had other players that were mercenaries. And now, or then later with Chaos March, it was, we've got 4 players, maybe 5 or 6 players that are dedicated to their factions, and then everyone else is a merc.
Yeah, this aspect just makes it easy for the battles actually to take place, because who is there plays, and who isn't there doesn't play, and the battles take place instead of you having to wait around to actually get the people in the right clans together to have the match.
Maybe a little bit tangential to this is, do you guys ever feel like the way that Mechwarrior is designed, the way that most of the games have played out, is that contrary to the way the lore reads, is the weapons effects are not as effective as what you would see in the lore. Obviously, you've had things in like Thunder Rift where our Gauss rifle ripped through a mech, literally ripping through a mech. And in the art, you'd see it, going completely through the mech even. Whereas if we were playing, Mechwarrior Online or even Mechwarrior Living Legends, is the weapon effect is it just takes some armor off, and I'm not talking so much about the effect itself of what you see, but more of the fragility and the high damage.
I don't want to cut you off, I'm sorry. On that note, the writing just includes the board game rules of criticals, and that's stuff that's mostly excluded from Mechwarrior, because it's questionable that that's actually fun to have in the game when you're playing it as a shooter simulation.
One of the things good.
I would tend to agree with Landros that it definitely feels different playing any of the Mechwarrior games to reading any of the lore, but that's because it seems like, at least in the lore, the encounters mech on mech last a matter of seconds, maybe. Whereas I think what Andrew said, that might not be fun if you're playing a first-person shooter where you get hit twice and you die. Or your mech is completely destroyed.
Not that you get hit twice and you die, but you randomly die. It's a critical. You just somebody scored a 20 on their hit roll, and that's when you get punctured and lie on the ground. And that's generally not something that's really great for online play, I'd say.
I don't know. The way I look at it, and this has kind of been driven more lately in the last 10 years by games like Dark Souls, or Escape from Tarkov, Arma, or even Rainbow Six Siege, where you've got this really low, what they call in the FPS world, TTK, which is time to kill. And you're seeing this in like Call of Duty and stuff, where these low amounts of time to kill something gives players a sense of triumph almost. It's almost kind of like casino psychology, if you could think of it like that. But I really feel like it could work in the Mechwarrior world. I think the biggest problem that everybody has complained about or talked about in the Battletech and Mechwarrior world differences is the pinpoint accuracy. And I think what's interesting and what really drove this lately to my mind was watching Mech Doomer, some of the videos of Mech Doomer of that. What's his name? Lewis, I think it's Lewis P3 or something like that.
Yeah.
Was watching the weapons fire from that. Was that torso mounted weapons still fired separately from the crosshair. And I know we were playing with that early in development to see if we could get it to do that. And unfortunately, the decision was made just make it pinpoint if we can, and that all the other aspects of it are to throw off your accuracy. To me, I feel like you could get away with something, and I've mentioned this before in chat, was an Elite Dangerous style system along with the torso weapon not adhering wholly to the crosshair, but only to a certain range. Like they're on a small gimbal or a very narrow gimbal where your weapons fire does not all converge to one point, but can converge to its own point. And so each weapon would have its own independent aiming system almost, where if you're shooting at a target that's far away and you've got mostly close range weapons or medium range weapons, it's not going to converge that far for you. Whereas if you had a large laser, and this happens too in the tabletop, and I think this system would work in comparison to that without having to deal with the randomness of rolls, is you would have a longer convergence for what am I trying to say here? A narrower convergence for long-range weapons versus a wider convergence for short-range weapons. And I think with that is anybody has played Elite Dangerous and you see some of those lasers where they kind of float around on the gimbal according to movement, I think that would play into the inaccuracy. So when you have more inaccuracy of hitting a target, you could probably bring down the armor values so that it's more lethal when you do actually connect. And so I feel like that TTK would really play into the skill of being able to get these weapons to connect.
On the team, we certainly have talked about aiming cones, but we generally feel that the existing community now wouldn't accept that if we went that way, even if this is still considered a beta. It has been running too long the way it has now, and such a drastic change.
So it'd be like for a future project sort of thing.
That
would be rejected. And
yeah, I mean, definitely not for Mechwarrior Living Legends. It was more kind of hypothesizing or opining about what kind of system do you feel would work in a future game. And I always kind of go back to this thought of raise the lethality of weapons, but make it harder to actually connect and really play that piloting and that skill of the player to drive that home. But again, there's balance issues there as well. And it's all dependent on the game systems that are developed. So, but I always wondered what other people thought of the lethality of the lore. Because I know Stackpole and the other writers, is some of them would actually play out the battles in the tabletop, and put that into writing.
All right, well, I think we're getting to the end of our time here, so if anybody has any clothing thoughts or anything like that, feel free to share them.
Tenchi is 2022.
Yeah.
All right, well, was there something else there?
No.
Okay. So in that case, I'd like to thank Shivoxy for our closing theme, and I would like to thank Timothy Seals for our opening theme. And this has been Returning to Base, a Mechwarrior Living Legends podcast.